Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Woodman, and I want to welcome you to my YouTube channel. In this video, we will talk about how conflict makes us smarter. This is important because when we hear different perspectives from people, we can expand our thoughts on how to approach certain situations appropriately and think wisely about them, especially when it comes to solving a problem. Let's lay the context behind this concept by talking about Socrates, who was the father of Western philosophy. He did not write down his ideas, so we instead know about him mostly through the accounts of contemporaries. The reason Socrates mistrusted the relatively new technology of writing at that time is because it could not respond to questions. He preferred talking, and he liked to talk with people who disagreed with him, or at least thought they did. His trick was to make them see through gentle questioning that they did not agree with themselves. Socrates believed that the best way to dispel illusions and identify fallacies was through the exchange of arguments. This took place face to face in the town square of Athens, often with the town's most respected intellectuals. His favorite technique was to invite someone to put forward an argument before asking why they believe that. Eventually, under persistent questioning, the intellectual's initial confidence would be revealed to be based on very little. Socrates was not out to humiliate anyone, but to reveal that we all know a lot less than we think. According to Anginus Callard, who was a professor at the University of Chicago and an expert on the ancient Greeks, explained that Socrates was not just an original thinker, but an innovator too. He was the first to propose, for example, that the truth can be reach more reliably and quickly if, instead of one person weighing up both sides of an argument, two or more parties are involved, each assigned a distinct role. Callard called this method the adversarial division of epistemic labor. This is where one party's job is to throw up hypotheses and the other party is to knock them down. People can cooperatively disagree in order to get to the truth, just as in a modern courtroom, a prosecutor and defender cooperate in a quest for justice by ripping each other's arguments apart. Keep in mind that theory is one thing, however, practice is another thing. In order to make this work, Socrates had to innovate in a different way. He had to inculcate a new set of social norms. It is not that Socrates's interlocutors were unaccustomed to debate. This was Athens, after all, a city that prided itself on its vigorous democracy, a city in which every man, although you did have to be a man with property, was free to express his opinions in public. Athens was a culture of persuasion, however, and so most Athenians conceived of disagreement as a zero-sum game. You either won or lost. Arguments were means to achieve instrumental ends, subordinated to political goals. It was also a culture of one-upmanship, where men competed to be the finest orators, the most skilled debaters, essentially. They were not pursuing truth, but prestige. And so Socrates had to model a new and different kind of conversation. There were moments in the dialogue, said Callard, where Socrates stepped aside from the topic under discussion in order to explain to his interlocutors what he and they are engaged in. Socrates said, quote, "I don't see myself as superior to the person I'm talking to. Inquiry isn't a status competition. It's about testing the quality of arguments. Spend time getting clear on your interlocutor's views and don't worry about finding answers. We're just trying to understand each other a little better. Arguing with someone is a sign of respecting them," unquote. Socrates also said, quote, "It is always my custom to pay attention when someone is saying something, especially when the speaker seems to me to be wise. And because I desire to learn what he means, I question him thoroughly so I can learn," unquote. Essentially, Socrates worked hard at communicating to his fellow Athenians that he wasn't trying to beat them at anything. He had no instrumental goal or ulterior motive. He was engaging them in a question to dispel falsehoods for the sake of it. Nobody had debated like this before, which is why Socrates had to describe what he was doing as he was doing it over and over again. He was explaining that the whole idea of freely exchanging ideas in philosophy and science comes from the goal of understanding each other's different viewpoints and exploring those views together. Still, to Socrates' listeners, this approach to debate was new and somewhat strange and unsettling. The intellectuals of Athens would have felt uneasy and sometimes upset as Socrates cheated away at their arguments. They were worried if they would lose respect or come out of this looking bad. Socrates had to do a lot of reassuring and soothing. All of this was because Athenians were not used to being disagreed with by someone who was not clearly trying to best them or persuade them to do something. In a cooperative disagreement, somebody has to be wrong, and Socrates made every effort to let Athenians know that not only is being proven wrong okay, but it is something to be grateful for. This is mainly about learning from a mistake and how to think smarter next time. The other founding fathers of Western philosophy adopted and developed a Socratic method. We know about Socrates from his student Plato, who presented his own ideas in a series of dialogues. Aristotle, Plato's student in turn, wrote a textbook on how to be an effective debater and developed the art of rhetoric, a series of techniques for persuasion. For all these thinkers, however, the class of views was not just a battle to persuade, but a way of generating truth, or at least dissolving falsehood. The Greeks also founded drama, a form of storytelling that distills truth from conflict. In medieval Europe, Christian scholars incorporated the rules laid down by the Greeks into the practice of disputation, which is a method of debate developed first in the monasteries and later in early universities, designed to teach and uncover truths in theology and science. Disputations took place both privately between a teacher and student and publicly in front of the university community. Every disputation followed a similar format. A question is asked, arguments in favor of one answer to the question are sought and examined. Next, arguments in favor of an opposing answer are considered. The arguments are then weighed against each other before one or another answer is chosen or a third one is found. Disputation it was competitive. The goal was to convince each other or an audience, but it was also believed that by examining a problem from different angles, new truths could emerge. The practice was essentially Socratic dialogue, formalized and scaled out. By the 16th century, Renaissance thinkers criticized universities for indulging in what they thought uninteresting intellectual debates instead of engaging with the real world. But it was the 17th century French philosopher Rene Descartes who really made the practice seem obsolete. He scored scholastic disputation as an artificial game that had become entirely about how to win arguments instead of the discovery of new truths. Descartes invented a new kind of philosophy grounded in his certainty of his own existence, where I think, therefore I am. Descartes said, quote, "If you want the truth, look within," unquote. The Protestant Reformation, with its emphasis on individual conscience, encouraged this turn towards inner contemplation. The practice of disputation was dealt with another blow by the invention of printing. When this happened, books were spreading around, which meant that individuals could self educate instead of subjecting themselves into arguments with teachers. In the 18th century, Enlightenment philosophers presented individual rationality as humanity's supreme gift. Immanuel Kant located the operation of reason in fundamental structures of the mind. Making a judgment had, until then, been regarded only as an action, as something that officials did in public. Kant was the first to conceive of it as a mental operation, which is a private act of understanding. Intellectual exploration came to be seen as something that happens inside the mind. There was a belief that only brilliant individuals who free themselves of the traditions laid down by ancient scholars could make breakthroughs. The idea of the individual genius, exemplified by Newton, became paramount. The irony is that this elevation of the individual mind took place at a time when thinking was becoming more intensely social and argumentative than ever. Scientific societies were formed, philosophers exchanged letters, and intellectuals gathered in coffee houses to swap stories and debate ideas. Even as thinking became more social, thinking about thinking became more abstract. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the study of reason, now identified with the study of formal logic, became increasingly mathematical. The correctness of an argument was something you could calculate using algebraic symbols. Ordinary language was not up to the task. 2 millennia after Socrates debated many people in Athens, the study of reasoning had become truly asocial, where our ideas about what constitutes good decision making and judgment center around the individual. This is all the background context I want you to be aware of because it shows the evolution of how conflicts and disagreements were transformed in a way that allows us to learn from each individual's perspectives. Let's proceed into talking about using authentic dissent to hear diverse viewpoints. Scientists who study group decision making have observed two major ways in which an absence of disagreement within a group of intelligent people can lead to bad decisions. First, there is an issue with a desire to conform, where someone follows the lead of a dominant person or people in the room. In conformity, a popular view instantly prevails, and the group goes along with that viewpoint without fully exploring the potential pitfalls of the viewpoint or alternatives. Nobody is essentially questioning what they are getting themselves into. The social psychologist Irving Janis, the first to name this phenomenon in 1972, called it groupthink. Second, there is an issue with shared information bias. This is what happens when everyone in the room assumes that everyone else knows more than them about the topic at hand. With nobody seriously challenging each other, the participants end up having only a superficial discussion. Essentially, a person won't disagree because they think they know less than everyone else, so the person does not want to question anyone's perspectives. But here's the thing about all of this. Disputing a question or disagreeing with something can flush out new reasons, information, and insights that would otherwise remain trapped inside people's heads. These days, we rightly put a lot of emphasis on constructing diverse teams, not just for reasons of social equality, but because the more varied the perspectives are around a table, the more creative and insightful the discussion will be. But that insight and creativity will only materialize if the people on their team are prepared to challenge each other openly. Remember, we can see disagreement as a benefit to diversity because we are letting others express their own thoughts on something before proceeding with a certain action. So everyone can make wise choices. Going back to Socrates, as he knew, or this may all be good in theory, but in practice, people find it uncomfortable and unpleasant to disagree. Dissenters from a consensus are often disliked, and disagreements can turn into bickering matches. After the notion of groupthink became widely known, some organizations started to look for ways to prevent teams from arriving at a consensus prematurely without things turning personal by adopting a solution proposed by Irving Janis, assign a devil's advocate. This specific practice has its origins in the Roman Catholic Church. When an individual is proposed for beatification or canonization, the devil's advocate is employed to make the case that the candidate is not worthy. In theory, by explicitly asking someone on the team to argue against whatever decision is being proposed, you get the benefits of disagreement, which is forcing out new information and better solutions without the cost to team harmony. However, being devil's advocate does not always work. Sherlin Nemeth, I should say, a professor of psychology at Berkeley University, ran experiments in which she compared authentic dissent, a group discussion in which the dissenter really believed in her point of view, with a devil's advocate group in which the dissenter was faking it, and a group in which there was no dissenter. Nemeth found that authentic dissent generated much more productive discussions with more original thoughts than either the consensus or devil's advocate conditions. In fact, the devil's advocate condition was counterproductive. It stimulated members of the group to produce more arguments in support of their initial plan without truly considering the other view. Nemeth calls this behavior cognitive bolstering. People playing devil's advocate were forcing themselves to come up with counter arguments without actually thinking about the sincerity behind them, compared to people authentically thinking about whether they should disagree with something or not. In further studies, Nemeth tested a subtler distinction. In one condition, someone spontaneously dissented from the majority view. In another, that same person was asked to make those same arguments that the rest of the group knew she truly believed in, after being publicly assigned the role of devil's advocate. Under both conditions, the disagreement created tension in the group and stimulated some dislike of the dissenter, but the spontaneous condition gave rise to a better discussion, generating more and better, that is, more creative solutions than the role play condition, even though the arguments and the person making them were identical. Nemeth's speculative explanation for the difference in productivity between the discussions is that the group sensed there was less at stake for the dissenter when she was playing the devil's advocate. In the spontaneous discussion, her dissenting position felt more courageous. When she was seen to be carrying out the researcher's instructions, the group perceived someone making smooth, confident arguments, but felt less responsible to question their own position. In the authentic condition, the other participants responded to the dissenter's vulnerability by opening up a little more themselves, resulting in a much richer discussion in which both sides allowed for the possibility of being persuaded. In other words, people are more likely to confront the possibility that they are wrong when faced with someone who appears to truly believe what they are saying and who is prepared to risk a risk by saying it. So, as we could see so far, productive disagreement depends on how people feel about each other. It becomes productive when we are authentic with ourselves. However, we spend a lot of time thinking about how to argue and not enough on how to shape the relationship that will define how the argument goes. It is often said that in order to disagree well, people need to put emotions aside and think purely rational, but this is a myth. Disagreeing productively requires a bond of trust, a sense that we are ultimately working with and not against each other. This is an inherently emotional question as well as a cognitive one, which is why the information we discussed in the previous video is crucial to understand this concept we are talking about right now. People are not purely rational, and acting as if they are leads to dysfunction. Let's continue with talking about motivated disagreement. Knowing this is important since it affects how you learn new information. In 2019, a team of scientists led by James Evans, a sociologist at the University of Chicago, tested this proposition using a vast database of disagreements, the edits made to Wikipedia pages. Evans was interested in the effects of political polarization and whether it was possible for polarized individuals to have productive disagreements. Here was a question they looked at. Does the clash of strongly opposed political perspectives always lead to hostility or avoidance, fight or flight, or can it be turned into something more fruitful? Evans realized that Wikipedia was a perfect place to investigate this question. Each page on Wikipedia is overseen by an ad hoc community of volunteer editors. Behind every topic, there is a talk page where anyone can open up to observe what goes on behind the scenes of the page you see. In the talk page, each editors debate, propose additions and deletions, and engage in elaborate arguments as they try to persuade each other of what should be included on the public-facing page. Some teams produce better quality pages than others based on how Wikipedia assigns a grade for quality to each page in terms of how readable, accurate, comprehensive, and well-sourced it is. Evans used machine learning to identify the political leanings of hundreds of thousands of editors, whether they were red or blue based on their edits of political pages. He was then able to identify the political makeup of thousands of editorial teams, including those working on pages relating to politics and social issues. Some articles were run by highly politicized teams made up of red and blue editors, others by editors who were more in alignment with each other. Here is what Evans discovered. The more polarized the team, the better the quality of the page. Ideologically, polarized teams were more competitive. They had more arguments than more homogeneous or moderate teams, but their arguments improve the quality of the resulting page. The conversations they had on the talk pages were longer because neither side was willing to give in on a point without a struggle. These longer arguments generated better quality content as assumptions were revealed and arguments were sharpened. Editors working on one page told the researchers, "We have to admit that the position that was echoed at the end of the argument was much stronger and balanced," unquote. That, quote, have to, unquote, is important. The begrudging way that each side came to an agreement made the answer they arrived at stronger than it otherwise would have been. As Evans put it, quote, if they too easily updated their opinion, then they would not have been motivated to find counterfactual and counter data arguments that fuel the conversation, unquote. You might have heard of the terms egoism, which is the need to be seen as right, and tribalism, which is the desire to see our group win. These two terms are usually portrayed only as inferences of good disagreement. Understandably so, because in most cases they are. The productive competition between Wikipedia's editing teams, however, suggests that even tribalism can bring up some intellectualism by letting the participants share a common goal and agree on rules of conduct. So when we have moments like these, we can let these things foster together so that we can make information sharing interactive. Now, let's go into talking about using collective thoughts and disagreements. Since Socrates' time, the ability to reason has been acclaimed as humanity's supreme attribute, the thing that sets us apart from other species. This raises a tricky question. If reasoning towards the truth is humanity's superpower, why is everyone so bad at it? If you were asked to help people arrive at more accurate beliefs and better decisions, you would probably start by improving their ability to spot their own errors. After all, nobody can be sure they are right about anything until they have fully considered why they might be wrong. But we are all generally very bad at this. We cling to our opinions even in the face of evidence to the contrary. For example, if you believe the end of the world is here, you will only notice bad news and screen out the good news that says otherwise. If you decide that a public figure is brilliant, you will only notice their achievements and ignore their mistakes. Or if you believe in a conspiracy theory, you will seek out posts online that agree with you and wave away the counter evidence. Why is that the case? Well, psychologists have now established that people are more likely to notice and consider evidence that confirms what they believe and to discount anything that suggests the opposite. Humans have an instinctive aversion to the possibility that they are wrong. They deploy their powers of reason to persuade themselves that they are right even when they are not. Armed with a hypothesis, we bend the world around it. This characteristic, known as confirmation bias, appears to be a serious problem for our species. It makes us more likely to deceive ourselves and to believe the lies of others, and less likely to see anyone's point of view. According to Raymond Nickerson, who is a psychologist at Tufts University, he said, quote, if one were to attempt to identify a single problematic aspect of human reasoning that deserves attention above all others, the confirmation bias would have to be among the candidates for consideration, unquote. Cleverness is no cure for this problem. Studies have found that intelligent and educated people are just better at persuading themselves they are right, since they are more skilled at generating self justifying arguments. A pair of evolutionary psychologists, Hugo Mercer and Dan Sperber, have offered insights into this type of case. They say if our reasoning capacity is so bad at helping individuals figure out the truth, that is because truth seeking is not its function. Instead, reason evolved to help people argue. Homo sapiens is an intensely collaborative species. Smaller and less powerful than other species, humans have nevertheless managed to dominate almost any environment they have set foot in, mainly because we are so good at banding together to get stuff done. To that end, humans have evolved our set of abilities for dealing with other humans. In Mercer and Sperber's view, reasoning is one of those social skills. Reasoning evolved to help people do things with other people to hunt down hunt down uh, certain things, make a fire, build a bridge, etc. Our giving and asking for reasons enabled individuals to influence others and win them to our sides. And it also had the effect of making people accountable for their own actions. The point of being able to come up with reasons is to present them to others in support of your argument or to knock down someone else's argument. That is, to argue. It is not hard to see why those with a superior reasoning ability would have been more likely to survive and pass on their genes. The ability to give and examine reasons turns disagreements that might have been violent, even fatally so, into arguments. For example, if I want to start a fire and you want to build a shelter, we can exchange reasons for and against doing so rather than fighting about it. Those who were particularly killed at taking part in this back and forth would be better at heading off threats and able to display their competence to the group, winning allies and impressing potential partners. The giving and asking of reasons is an important way for people to establish the kind of relationships that will establish them to collaborate. For you to trust me as someone with whom you can do business, literally and metaphorically, I can't just say I want something or that I disagree. I need to explain why, and I expect the same from you. The only people we don't expect this from are small children who, when asked to justify their wants, they tend to simply say, "quote because I want it," unquote. Teaching children to say something more persuasive after because is vital. It's a vital part of their socialization. Parents can encourage that by modeling it. So children can grow up being used to conveying their arguments and their reasoning. When you have a disagreement with your child, try and give them reasons for why you want them to do something, even when all you really want to say is, quote, because I say so, unquote. Let's be honest, you can't say this to every single person you interact with as a reason for doing something because that is not substantive and does not explain your reasoning behind something. It is not a healthy way to engage in a conversation with someone. One thing to keep in mind about Mercer and Sperber is that they are interactionists as opposed to intellectualist thinkers. For intellectualists, the purpose of reason is to enable individuals to gain knowledge of the world. But as we have seen, reason often seems to be used to entrench whatever we want to believe, regardless of whether it is true or not. In the intersectionalist view, reason did not evolve to help individuals reach truths, but to facilitate communication and cooperation. In other words, reasoning is inherently social and makes us smarter only when we practice it with others in the process of an argument. Socrates was onto something. The myth of the rational individual who can think their way through any problem in isolation is powerful but misleading. For a start, while humans have accumulated a vast store of collective knowledge, each of us alone knows surprisingly little, certainly less than we imagine. For instance, in 2002, the psychologists Frank Kiel, Keelit, I should say, and Leonard Rosenblit asked people to rate their own understanding of how zips work. The respondents answered confidently. After all, they use zips all the time. But when asked to explain how a zip works, they fail to adequately do so. Similar results were found when people were asked to describe climate change and the economy. We know a lot less than we think we do about the world around us. Cognitive scientists call this, quote, the illusion of exploratory depth, unquote, or just, quote, the knowledge illusion, unquote. What enabled humans to live on Earth is not that we think for ourselves, it is instead our unrivaled ability to think in groups. There is nothing we do, from getting dressed to using a computer, etc., that does not rely on the knowledge of other people. Each of us is plugged into a vast network of knowledge passed down from the dead and shared among the living. The more open and fluid your local network, the smarter you get. Open disagreement is one of the main ways we have of understanding other people's knowledge while sharing our own knowledge to the rest of society. However, as Socrates knew, disagreements only generate truth under certain conditions, one of them being what Mercer and Spepper called a division, or quote, a division of cognitive labor, unquote. This means in the ideal discussion, each individual focuses mainly on the search for reasons for their preferred solution, while the rest of the group critically evaluates those reasons. Everyone throws up their own hypotheses, which are then tested by everyone else. That is a much more efficient process than having each individual try to come up with and evaluate all the different arguments on both sides of the issue, and it is likely to lead to better decisions. This solves a puzzle of why confirmation bias was part of our evolutionary process. In the context of a well functioning group discussion, confirmation bias is a feature, not a bug, though only if we use it as nature intended. Think about what it is like when someone contradicts you. You feel motivated to think of all the reasons you are right and to cite them in your support, at least if it is something you care about or when it is important to be correct. That is an emotional response as much as a cognitive one. Some people might advise you to put your emotions to one side and evaluate arguments purely rationally, but by allowing your emotions to drive your search for good arguments, you are actually doing something productive, contributing new information and new ways of thinking about the problem to the group. You might be doing it for selfish or narrow reasons. Maybe you want to justify yourself and prove how smart you are. Even then, you will help the group generate a diversity of viewpoints as people strive to put their reasons forward. Since everyone has an incentive to knock down competing arguments, the weakest arguments get dismissed while the strongest arguments survive, bolstered with more evidence and better reasons. The result is a much deeper and more rigorous thought process than any one of you could have carried out alone. That is exactly how the Wikipedia editing process works. It is like it is the principle that underlies Socratic dialogue. To be clear, when we look at confirmation bias through the interactionist lens, confirmation bias is not something to eliminate, it is something to harness. Under the right conditions, it raises the collective intelligence of a group. What are those conditions? First, the group must disagree openly, with each individual feeling genuinely compelled and able to put their best case forward. Second, and most fundamentally, the members of the group must have a common interest in the truth or the right direction. If each member is only defending their own position or trying to get a one up on everyone else, then the weaker arguments don't get eliminated and the group will make any progress on going forward with won't make any progress on going forward with a decision, a good decision, I should say. When each person takes a strong position and at the same time allows themselves to be persuaded by better arguments, the group moves forward with a good decision. Now, now that we know more about confirmation bias, let's talk about having collective thoughts to reduce confirmation bias. 400 years ago, Francis Bacon warned against confirmation bias. So, to solve this problem, he formulated what became known as the scientific method. He instructed scholars to test their theories against real world observation so that they could, quote, analyze nature by proper rejection and exclusion, unquote. Following Bacon, science developed into a discipline and a community with the division of cognitive labor. Scientists publish research on the topics they care about and try to build a case for their theory. Their work is peer reviewed and examined by other experts in their field. Scientists try to knock down each other's arguments at the same time as they learn from each other. Much as we celebrate great individual scientists, it is scientists as a group who make progress. Confirmation bias becomes more prominent when an individual is isolated from people who disagree with them, no matter how brilliant their mind is. Isaac Newton spent the last decades of his life immersed in a futile quest to turn base metals into gold. If that work did not lead anywhere, it was at least partly because he did it alone, without collaboration or reviewers. When he published his groundbreaking work in physics, by contrast, Newton was drawing on the published works of others and doing so in the knowledge that mathematicians and astronomers across Europe would pounce on any weak arguments. For the most part, this scientific method system has worked very well, leading to the huge advances in medicine and technology that define modernity. It is when science's participants forget how to disagree well that things can get bent out of shape, as the story of John Yudkin illustrates. Let's go over that. In the early 1980s, Western governments, after consulting with the world's top nutrition scientists, told us to change the way we ate. If we wanted to stay healthy, they said we needed to cut back on foods rich in saturated fats and cholesterol. By and large, we did as we were told. Steak and sausages were replaced with pasta and rice, butter with margarine and vegetable oils, and eggs and toast with mousseline and low-fat yogurt. Instead of becoming healthier, however, many people grew fatter and sicker. In the decades that follow, a public health catastrophe unfolded, or catastrophe, I should say, unfolded. Obesity, which until then had been relatively stable, rose dramatically, as did the incidence of related diseases like diabetes. In recent years, the advance has changed. Although we are still advised to moderate our fat consumption, we are told to beware of another enemy of our health, one that is just as bad, if not worse. It would be sugar. It would be natural to believe that this sharp change of emphasis came about because nutrition science advanced and new discoveries were made, but that is not true. The scientific evidence was there all along. It was overlooked because nutrition scientists had forgotten how to disagree with each other and allow confirmation bias to affect their perspectives. John Yudkin is a professor of nutrition at Queen Elizabeth College in London, where he published a book called Pure, White, and Deadly that was published in 1972. It warned the world that the real threat to people's health was not fat, but sugar. He wrote, quote, "If only a small fraction of what we know about the effects of sugar were to be revealed in relation to any other material used as a food additive, that material would properly be banned," unquote. Yudkin noted that refined sugar has been a major part of Western diets for only 300 years. In evolutionary terms, it is as if we have just this second taking our first dose of it. Saturated fats, by contrast, are so intimately bound up with our evolution that they are abundantly present in breast milk, To Yudkin's thinking, it seemed more likely that the recent innovation rather than the prehistoric staple was making people sick. He also believed that the evidence that fat is bad for us was relatively weak. He argued that sugar was a more likely cause of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. In the 1960s, a debate over whether sugar or fat was more harmful was a lively one. But by the time Yudkin wrote his book, his field had been seized by proponents of the fat hypothesis, and most nutrition scientists had signed up to a new consensus. A healthy diet is a low-fat diet. His book, intended as a warning to the general public, was a last resort. He paid a high price for arguing that sugar was a bigger threat than fat. The world's top nutrition scientists did not like having their ideas challenged so publicly. Yudkin was disinvited to scientific conferences and shunned by scientific journals. His own college went back on a promise to let him continue to use its research facilities after his retirement, since it was no longer deemed politic to have an opponent of the fat hypothesis on the premises. Yudkin's research eventually fell out of circulation altogether. Meanwhile, following advice from the nutrition science elite, American and British governments told their citizens to reduce consumption of fast and cholesterol-rich foods. When people cut back on fat, they usually increase their consumption of carbohydrates. Food manufacturers also responded to the new directives by selling low-fat foods, made more palatable by the addition of sugar. It is now becoming increasingly apparent that by turning saturated fats into our number one dietary enemy, we miss the threat of the most versatile, palatable, and unhealthy carbohydrate of all. So, why do I bring up this story of Yudkin? It shows that how even new ideas that challenge existing scientific perspectives can sometimes make scientists nervous and doubtful, so they become defensive and become unwilling to learn from those new ideas, even if those new ideas deserve to be heard. The story of Yudkin's professional demise scared off any other scientists interested in challenging the consensus that fat was the chief problem with Western diets. Only in the 21st century did it become acceptable again in scientific circles, even to research what sugar does to our bodies. A pediatrician called Robert Lustig led the way. After studying sugar's effects on the metabolic system in 2013, he published Fat Chance, a book exposing the link between sugar and obesity that went on to become a global bestseller. Yudkin's research had been so well buried that Lustig only came across it by accident when a fellow scientist mentioned it to him at a conference. Lustig was astonished to find that it anticipated his own work. The obesity epidemic is often blamed on the food industry, and certainly the food companies have a lot to answer for. But if the nutritional advice we have followed for all this time was profoundly flawed, that is also because even scientific inquiry is prone to dysfunctional group behavior, hurting towards majority opinion, intense discomfort with admitting to error, and deference to the dominant viewpoint. So, based on this example on obesity and sugar, it is clear that we have to collectively think about the information we receive and use that information to make wise choices together. It is not to say we can't disagree. Disagreements can make us smarter as individuals and as groups by enabling us to learn from others and forcing us to think harder about why we believe what we believe. But as Socrates knew, for disagreement to generate insight instead of anger, you have to manage the relationship issues that disagreements inevitably create, I should say. Only when there is a shared understanding, we can respect and trust each other's judgments and make an inappropriate decision about something. In conclusion, conflict and disagreement are not obstacles to learning something, but instead ways to be smarter in approaching a situation by hearing people's thoughts on it. From Socrates in ancient Athens to modern scientists studying group decision making, we see the same lesson repeated. When people challenge each other's ideas in a spirit of shared understanding rather than competition, Everyone benefits because we learn more than we did before. Disagreement exposes weak assumptions, surfaces hidden information, and forces us to think more carefully about what we believe and why. But productive conflict and disagreement does not happen automatically. It requires trust, mutual respect, and a shared goal of discovering what is true, not just winning an argument. Authentic dissent, where people genuinely stand behind their views, leads to deeper, more creative thinking than force or performative disagreement. When we feel safe enough to be wrong, we become free to learn. Through the research we looked at on groupthink, confirmation bias, and evolution of human reasoning, they show that we are not at our smartest when we think alone. We are smartest when we think together, such as testing each other's ideas, offering reasons, and staying open to being persuaded. History also warns us what happens when disagreement is suppressed. Bad ideas go unchallenged, and progress stalls, as seen in the scientific field. As the scientific field shut out a viewpoint on sugar for some time. So the goal is not to avoid conflicts and disagreements, but to do it well. When we approach conflicts and disagreements with curiosity instead of ego and collaboration instead of rivalry, those two things become tools for growth. It sharpens our thinking, broadens our perspective, and helps us make wiser decisions than any of us could reach on our own. We build a sense of community and belonging when people know their perspectives are being heard and considered when conflicts and disagreements occur. In the next video, we will talk about how conflict inspires us. Until then, please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and turn on the post notifications so you will be notified when I post my next video. I appreciate your support. Remember, you are powerful, you are capable, and you are the changemaker our society needs. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you soon.